Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Natty Cast. And now to your hosts, Tim Barker, Rex Stull, and Ron Thomas.
How often do you get back to New York, Rocky?
Not very often anymore, man. I think I was probably been back maybe once since the pandemic.
Okay.
I went up there and picked up actually this model that's behind me. It's a model, it's a 6-foot model of the Rex, the ship, the Rex, which is my grandparents actually came to the U.S. on the Rex. And I found it, I always looked for kind of memorabilia, and I found this, and it was up in Queens somewhere. And so Matthew and I drove up during the pandemic, and we were driving over, so we picked this thing up and, stayed in a hotel. And it was just bizarre. I know you were up there, Tim, but man, it was just bizarre. We drove all around. Times Square, empty basically. We ended up driving down the bottom of the island, and we drove across, I think, the Brooklyn Bridge and back the Manhattan Bridge. It took like 6 minutes. I was like, this is incredible. I don't think I've ever done any of this before.
My daughter, who will be 24 this year, at the height of the pandemic, and probably maybe a couple months into the pandemic in 2020, we were here. It was 5 o'clock, rush hour here in Los Angeles, and I said to her, "Let's go to Santa Monica." And she's like, "Why?" I said, "Because we can." We got on the freeway, the 101 freeway at 5 o'clock. And if anybody knows that drive, the last thing you want to do is get on the 101 freeway at 5 o'clock. We went round trip from Hollywood to Santa Monica in like 45 minutes because we could.
Yeah.
And she's like, and why are we doing this? I was like, because we'll never be able to do it again.
Yeah, you'll never
Never
do that again.
We when Matthew moved into town, which is really it was 2021, and we drove in, and kind of came in right through downtown LA, and we were going to go stay somewhere. I just couldn't believe it. I said, "You realize how close things are here? They're not that far away. You just think of everything as being an hour away, or like you said, if you got on there, it'd be 2 hours to get over there."
Because it could take you an hour to go 5 miles because of traffic. Yeah.
Is your daughter following in your footsteps?
Absolutely not. My daughter she's very quiet, introverted, and she's not the person that lets you know she's in the room when she's not front and center, but she's a great kid, very intuitive, great listener. I think she'd probably make a very good executive producer someday if she ever did decide to do the business.
Yeah. Where'd she go to school? What was her major?
She was a freshman. I cannot imagine, having your freshman year curtailed because of a global pandemic. She was a freshman at Loyola in majoring in psychology, and when they pulled the plug on everything, her first little taste of independence. The next thing you know, your parents pull up and go, "Put all your stuff in the car. They just pulled the plug." So for the next 2 years, everything changed.
Yeah, Matthew had just moved out in fact, he went to Portland, and he'd been there for, 6 or 8 weeks. And it was a similar sort of thing. I've been watching this. We have some offices in Europe, and I watched it kind of come across Europe, and I'm looking at this, and he was up in Portland in an Airbnb in some woman's house, renting a room. And I was like, maybe just come home for 4 or 6 weeks, and you don't know anybody there. And, I was afraid they weren't going to be flying. So, come back, like you said, for a year and a half later.
Yep. Exactly.
I think that there's a generation of kids. It's going to be felt. They were fortunate. Both he and his sister had just gotten out of college when it hit, because that's a terrible thing. And a lot of them ended up doing their classes entirely online. And it's just
and my daughter really struggled online because she's not an online student. Literally, right. Some of us need the aesthetic of being in the classroom and having that access. And there were a lot of things that you had to be able to really kind of read between the lines, because some of those classes there was no administrator, there was no teacher. There were things you'd go there and there'd just be messages on a screen that you had to follow. So
and I think also, look, the information, there's nobody has a corner on it, whether you're at Loyola or NYU or whatever. The actual information you're learning is one thing, but it is the experience of being in the room, the professor, your fellow students. That's a huge part of, especially at that age, being at college and figuring that out.
And the college experience.
Exactly.
Those 4 years,
you
kind of solidify, a lot of times you solidify like lifetime friendships. it's your first taste of adulthood, your first taste of making decisions on your own.
Yep.
I mean, hey, yeah, maybe mom, dad are still sending you money for laundry and your meal cards and whatever, but as far as, I can't imagine. I got my bachelor's degree at Webster College at the time. It's still Webster College. And that was 4 years in St. Louis, literally, on your own. And I can't imagine not having that 4-year experience and then sort of going out into the world. Yeah. I even think about it for professional athletes. Asking a 19-year-old kid, would you rather go to school for 4 years or make $20 million? You know what the answer is going to be.
Right.
Sure.
But I see a lot of guys, especially out here in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, because all actors want to be athletes or musicians, and all athletes want to be actors. And so I meet a lot of these guys who've either at the end of or have retired, and they talk about the fact that the not having the college experience, even though they were, hey, 19 years old, you're a blue chip athlete, and of course everybody around you is like, hey, what if you have a catastrophic injury your sophomore year and you never make it to the pros? So they leave.
Right.
But that experience, that 4 year, whether 4 year or if you go to graduate school or whatever, that experience sort of sets you up for the rest of your adult life. I said most of the relationships I have now were those relationships I made during college.
Yeah. And the funny thing, too, is the NLI or the NIL money is changing that in a way where these kids are they have the opportunity to make some money while they're in college. But it also, like at Duke, Krzyzewski, where he got a lot of those kids to stick around for those 4 years.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was such a
Well,
dynamic that's so rare.
Yeah, I talk about, especially now, because I think we're just, and it's a different society. I'm sure you guys can all, and people come to me. A lot of times I meet a lot of, especially young performers, in earnest, and they want to know, like, how did you get to be where you are? Like, what did you do? What steps did you take? And when they realize that you took a lot of steps to get there, they're like, well, is there a shorter version of that?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Is there a way to get there 25 years before that?
Is there a way to get there in August? It's like,
Yeah.
and my running joke is, hey, Michael Jordan went to school for 2 years, so,
right.
and literally the difference, and, we use the term sustainability a lot now in society, but, I was very fortunate where I grew up in an environment where the talent could be nurtured, because I meet so many incredibly talented, naturally talented people, which you can't teach. You can't teach talent,
Right.
but you can cultivate it and nurture it.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to have, people have to be willing to take the time to have whatever skills they have or gifts they have cultured and nurtured. But we are such a society of it's the American Idol society. Nobody knows you in November, and by April you've got a record deal. It's like,
Sure.
so if that's what you're seeing on TV, it's like, what do you mean it took 10 years for you to get you went to school and then you did what? You worked summers. It's like, there's got to be a shorter way.
That TikTok mentality, that 6-second attention span.
And that's what it breeds. I always talk about sports. I said, the average NFL career is about 3.5 years. The average NBA career for these guys who are first-round draft picks, everybody's number one choice. So many of those guys may last 3-4 years in the league because that talent's never
Rookie
been developed.
contract, and then they're done. Yeah.
Hey, for a lot of those guys, the best day of their professional career is draft day.
Right.
It's
all down up from there. Yeah. I mean, back to kind of starting Rocky. I mean, we set this thing up. The Natty Cast. We're kind of talking about people who came from Cincinnati and went out into the world, and I think you're just a perfect example of that. But give us a little background. Like, where'd you grow up? How did you? I know we all went to the performing arts school. How did you end up there?
Yeah, I was talking about this, and Tim was. When I came back to the SCPA event in January, I remembered, I said, if you wrote this in a script, most studios would reject it and go, no, it's just too on the nose, and it's not, things don't happen like that in the real world.
It's maybe movie of the week stuff, but it's not a feature, right?
Yeah.
But I literally lived in a neighborhood where one of the most desirable schools in the city was built, or was in this program. I was even, before we were at 1310 Sycamore Street, I grew up in Mount Auburn at the bottom of the hill of Dorchester and Reading Road. I was walking distance to Mount Adams. And then when the school moved downtown, I was still walking distance to the SCPA building on Sycamore Street. And I said to, a lot of times when I do these interviews, I said, I literally lived walking distance from a school that was basically life-changing for, me and generations of other kids. And it was such an anomaly. It was one of the most desired schools in probably one of the most undesirable parts of the city at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I said as the time went on and as I got older and, moved away from school, but I was born and raised in Mount Auburn, and I was a fifth grader at Taft Elementary School, which was right in the heart of Mount Auburn, and there was an art teacher. His name was Ed Harris, like the actor. And I remember Mr. Ed Harris, the art teacher, saying to me somewhere in the middle of my fifth grade year, there's this school that's in Mount Adams. It's a new school. It's a relatively new school. It's a performing arts school. And I think you should audition. I think you should apply to the school, because if you stay here at William Howard Taft Elementary, you're going to spend most of your formative years in the principal's office, because we don't take as kindly to class clowns as they do at that school.
It's the home of the class clown over there. They celebrate them over there.
Over there, they nurture them and train them over there. Here, we send them to the principal's office. So literally at grade 5, I had an art teacher said, hey, there's this, there's this school that's dedicated toward, and I think you might have, you might have something there that they can work with and cultivate. So, I mean, at that point, I'm 11 years old. I mean, I'm not like, well, I got to weigh my options. I was like, sure, okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember your audition? Did you go in as like for everything? Was it for art, or did you go in for drama?
It was for everything. Back then at SCPA, and this was, I think it was still called Mount Adams. I don't even think we were called SCPA at the time. And I remember auditioning at Mount Adams, and I think you had to sing, you did a monologue, you found out what your vocal range was with Frank Lang, who was the music teacher at the time. And
Frank Lang.
And you did, there was dance, and because you had to major, you had to have a major, and you also had to minor in something. So, you kind of did a little bit of everything. And like I said, at that age, I'd be lying if I told you. I just thought at age 11, it's like somebody's pointing you in a direction, go in that room and do what you do. That's kind of what I remember. But it was really, like I said, I didn't realize at that point that this was going to be, your life is now about to change. You're now on a path. I tell people all the time, I'll be 62 years old this July, and I've spent most of my life doing the thing that I laid in the grass dreaming about when I was 7 years old. Yeah. And I said, most people don't have that luxury. I said, but there were so many elements. There were so many things going on. And, being in a city like Cincinnati that was polarized, kind of racially divided and polarized to begin with. And I always say to people, I said, we were part of a social experiment that we didn't really realize that we were.
So
I
true.
said, but all the people who were connected to that school, the teachers, the administrators, all the people, all the grown-ups behind that school, the supporters of the school, they all knew. It was kind of I always think, I think it's more subversive than it appeared to be at the time, but they knew that kids, if you put kids, regardless of race, social, economic background, if you put them in the same band or in the same orchestra or in the same dance troupe or in the cast of the same show, that it can transcend any differences and that kids will work together. Kids get it, and that was sort of the crux. That was the whole reason behind the school. And it's true, and for at least the period that I was there, for one brief shining moment, I think it really that was really kind of, we exemplified that, and I think, for me the biggest gift we had as students is that, especially at those time in the early 70s and the 80s, a lot of those teachers and a lot of those administrators were students themselves during the 60s. Right. And so they were on those college campuses that were protesting, whether it was the war in Vietnam or whatever social ills that were going on in the world. And I think they realized that they weren't that far from finishing their own education. Some of them maybe, less than 10 years when they were teachers and administrators at SCPA. And I think that there was a whole group of people who were behind that school who came from that turbulent era of the 60s, who realized that if there was going to be any kind of significant change in society, it was going to come from the education system.
Yeah, and start young. I mean, right?
Yeah.
To start where, like you said, you can put students together and they get it. You grow up that way, and it seems natural. Versus all these other people. And we've talked actually on this podcast before about the fact that the alternative schools in Cincinnati, so the Performing Arts School and the German Academy and things, came out of the busing stuff, right? Other is desegregation of schools,
right?
And so other places, Cincinnati was quite unique, literally just said, oh, hey, you're a black kid, get on a bus and ride 30 minutes across town to some white school, and the same thing, vice versa. They just started busing kids around to integrate schools. Right. And Cincinnati took this approach with these alternative schools. I mean, CAPE was around, and there were all these different versions of it. And the Performing Arts School, so it takes the funding from that and the concept of that, takes the idea that you're going to fully integrate it, that's going to be 50-50 integrated, that it's going to come from around the city and be economically diverse, and then couple that with the idea of an arts education, right? That is subversive, to your point. I mean, that is, but a totally unique experience, I think, for all of us.
And I agree. And I think like I said, and I think the hope was that other programs would emulate it and it would grow. It would kind of blossom, and that people would go, hey, this really works. And regardless of if the students become professional, actors, musicians, et cetera, having a broad education, having your horizons expanded through art, music, visual art, whatever, makes for a better society. People are much more well-rounded. I have a lot of friends that were, either students at SCPA or schools like that, who may not have gone into the profession. They may not be professional musicians or professional dancers, but having an appreciation for art, music, dance, and literature has opened, broadened their horizons and made them a much more well-rounded person and a better person in society. And that was sort of the, I think that was the big prize of the alternative schools. But somewhere along the way that got co-opted. Somewhere along the way that idea began to get lost, and we kind of lost its way. And, different governments, different administrations come in. They look at what can we trim, what programs can be cut. Do we really need to fund violins for a school or do we really need to pay for drums? Do we really need to pay for, having all these things? These are these absolutely necessary to a kid's education? And, there are a couple of people who will tell you, one of them's almost 90 years old, still living in Cincinnati, that it's actually essential to make creating a better society. And like I said, I think there was this war of ideas that were going on. When we as kids, we were just, it wasn't being explained to us. We were just, hey, you're in this orchestra, you're in this band, you're in this group, you look out for each other. And that white kid getting off the bus in downtown Cincinnati, if somebody's giving him a hard time, well, he's our first trumpet player. And we don't sound good if somebody hits our first trumpet player in the mouth.
Right.
So we're not looking at, some white kid from an affluent neighborhood. It was like, well, no, we got to go rescue our boy here, because if he gets hit in the mouth, we're going to sound horrible. And so that was our mindset. But I realized, like I said, over time, and leaving Cincinnati and leaving that world, that it was such a utopian world. And I moved to New York City, and I'm thinking, hey, this is just going to be an extension of what I experienced at SCPA. Well, good morning. Good morning to you. I've realized that, okay, the world, at my experience in Cincinnati at SCPA was the world as it should be. The world as it is was a completely different and rude awakening for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was there a particular moment, Rocky? So you enter SCPA at 6th grade. Was there a particular moment or role at that time there where it really landed with you, that you were like, oh, I want to make this happen. I want to continue with this?
No, I think it was just, and as Rex sort of mentioned earlier, because we were there at such an early stage, I think in those early years, you're a kid at school, you're a kid at play, and that's as it should be.
Yeah.
It really wasn't until like junior and senior year that I started thinking about, I could make a life of this. This could be my life. Maybe this is my life's work.
Yeah.
I think up until then, you were just, it was a lot of fun. You were, as a kid, you were growing up.
Yeah.
But somewhere around junior, senior year,
Yeah.
I thought, you know what? I think this is the path I'm going to take. I mean,
Right.
and stay on this path.
When you were one of the first group, and maybe in the first group that ended up going to Webster, I remember there was Tim followed right in your footsteps and went to Webster after you. So were you kind of like the first one or from the group?
Actually, I think I was in the second group because I remember Ron Bomer coming back from his holiday break at Webster. Ron was 2 years ahead of me at SCPA, and Ron and Amy Endries, and there were maybe one other person I can't remember who may have been at Webster. But I remember Ron coming back and coming to Fran Haas's acting class, and singing the praises of this conservatory program that he was going at this little school in St. Louis. And like I said, I didn't overthink anything. I think one of the blessings that a curse that I always had for me was I didn't overthink anything. I was like, well, if it's good enough for Ron, I guess I'll go to Webster.
Yeah, because it's just interesting because it opened up a pipe that from performing arts school to Webster that carried on for a while and carried a lot of people with it.
And the dean of the fine arts department at Webster would make an annual pilgrimage to SCPA to recruit. So Ron,
it was beneficial to both sides, right? I think you guys clearly found a place where you could go and this is a place we can be, and I think they looked at it and said, hey, there's some talented kids coming out of this place. Let's go.
I think it was beneficial both ways. I think for me, I could never see because at that time I was in the third graduating class at SCPA, so class of 1981 was the third graduating class. My entire graduating class totaled, I think it was 99 of us. There were 9, and I was going to like my friends who were graduating from Woodward and Western Hills. Their senior class was like 700 kids, and I was thinking, I could never see myself at Ohio State or Michigan or at some big campus. The thought of that was just overwhelming to me. So when I heard about this little program and at this college with less than 10,000 students total from at the university, I was like, that's where I want to be. I want to be somewhere where I won't be lost in the shuffle. Now I don't, and if I gotten accepted to the University of Michigan, I think I would have been pretty overwhelmed. But that little school in St. Louis was a perfect fit for me.
I don't know if you know this, Rocky, but I'm trying to keep that pipeline alive because the scholarship that I endowed, I just recently I'm bringing Ramey Cornell is now the teacher of acting at Webster, and I've invited her. We had a sit down with the juniors and seniors last October, I think it was, and to keep Webster on their map, on their radar. And now we've had two of the seniors. It looks like. Have gotten scholarships to go there, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and Sonny, speaking of Ron Bomer, one of the last visits that the senior class at Webster made to Los Angeles when Peter Sargent, who became the dean of fine arts, but by the time he retired, but he was the guy who recruited me, and he had been there 30 years after, who just passed away I think within the last couple of years. Did we lose Peter?
Yep.
But one of the last visits that made when he was still with us, Ron Bomer's daughter was a senior at Webster. So
that's great.
It was amazing. I'm taking a picture with the guy who I followed to Webster, his daughter. I'm now taking a picture with his daughter who's graduating from it.
That's beautiful.
Fantastic. Yeah. So you graduate from Webster, and you're now convinced you're going to go. Were you doing summer stock in the summer, or like what did you do in the summers?
I think, and it's funny because in my acting class, I think I was probably the only student, maybe one of a handful of us, who actually started doing summer stock while I was still at Webster. So I think maybe either my sophomore to my senior year, I was going to the Hope Summer Theater in Michigan and doing summer stock. So I was, I said my first professional gig, I thought, well, I made it. I'm making $75 a week and I got free room and board.
That's right.
Outstanding.
This is the life. This is what's better than this, right? But I was doing, and I was coming back for my junior and my senior year, having done like 3 shows and rotating rep and spending the summer doing that, where most of my other classmates were, going home and doing whatever they did during the summer. But that's really, Tim, when I was starting to get a sense of like, okay, I think I have the chops, and I think I have the, from my training at SCPA, from the life at SCPA, this is the life I know. This life fits me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you Michael Pierce? Did you have him when you were at Webster as your acting teacher?
No, I did not. Michael Pierce was not. I had Wayne Louie was still a teacher there. Marita Woodruff was still teachers there.
Sure.
And I think they were all kind of like on the fence with me because they were like, I think they were still like, maybe you should do stand up, but I don't know about really.
Still on the class clown thing.
I was still in
there.
the class clown.
Wow.
Like, even the acting teacher was like, maybe you should start working with an improv troupe and, maybe you could have shot on Saturday Night Live or something. It was like, you could go either way. I still didn't.
Well, I know you had a guest starring role where you were a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, and I did my first television show was a sitcom. So I mean, I didn't realize just how well-rounded my education was until I got out in the world and I realized that there are a lot of guys who were trying to do the same thing that I did, but only did one thing.
Yeah, and hadn't had all those experiences. I mean, you think about it, and I realize it's in high school or whatever, but you'd been if you're doing summer stock, you're doing shows in college, you've got a lot of experience under your belt by the time you get there that other people maybe didn't have.
Absolutely. We were 7th and 8th grade doing Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller plays and restoration comedy and
William
Shakespeare.
Inge.
William Inge. Why was I doing Streetcar Named Desire in the 8th grade?
I was Willie Loman. Now, I can't tell you for a second that I understood at all what I was doing, but I was doing it.
Death of the Salesman in junior high. It's
exactly.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yeah, right.
It's like, so by the time I got to college, I was like, I've been doing this since I was in middle school.
Right.
Just having a sense of that.
Right.
For a lot of my classmates who were, freshmen, sophomores in college, now 19, 20 years old, I just kind of felt like a vet. I felt like, I had been on stage since I was 11 years old, or I'd been in some version of it, and had. So that's what I always felt like. This is the path that I'm going to do this. And I think the one thing that I credit myself for was all the performers, all the actors that I looked up to, they all had one thing in common. No matter how talented they were, they all went to some form of training, to some sort of training program. They were either from the actor studio. Meryl Streep went to Yale. All these different people. You read about it, and it's like I said, Michael Jordan went to school for 2 years. I'm like, what's 2 years? Well, I'll give it 2 years.
So you graduate Webster, and then do you desire New York? Do you get something that brings you to New York? What was your game plan at that point?
It was a very charmed series of events. I graduated Webster, and I stayed in St. Louis for another year because I was the first Webster graduate, I think, who was who became a member of the resident acting company at the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. So I got my equity card at the regional theater that was across the street from Webster.
You rolled out of college into that company and out of that company with your equity card.
Exactly.
That's phenomenal.
Wow. There was a new artistic director the year I graduated from Webster. There was a new artistic director at the Repertory Theater of St. Louis, a guy by the name of David Chambers, and I literally came out of college and got drafted into the pros, and my biggest, and I still say the thing that I remember most and I feel the most proud of was when I found out that I was made a member of that resident company, I asked our artistic director if we would audition all the rest of my classmates, so they could all audition for the company as well, and they agreed to do it. So we were all able to. The rest of my classmates, I think there were like 15 of us, and like I said, very small program.
Right.
But I was like, hey, I feel like this is such an incredible opportunity. Can my friends audition at least?
Yeah, right.
And that was my fondest memory of that year. But that was literally, I walked across the street from the university I graduated from and got my equity card and started working at the rep.
And then where does New York come into play?
New York was, like I said, about a year after when that season ended, and that was the 86-87 season, the summer of 1986. I went to New York basically on a whim to audition for the New York Shakespeare Festival, and that's how I ended up moving to New York. I didn't have a place to stay. I said, well, it's a crapshoot. I got a return flight. There were a lot of those cheap airlines that you could, for $99, you could fly around.
Express
People's
Express,
Piedmont, People's Express. So I figured, if I crap out up here, if it doesn't work out, I'll just get a return flight and go back home, and start fresh again. And a friend of mine who had gone to Webster for a couple of semesters and then left because he said, this is too small a town for me. I'm a New Yorker. When you graduate, when you get out of here, come look me up in New York City.
Give me a call.
That's exactly what I did. And I spent the night on his couch after the day I auditioned. But I go to New York that summer. I leave the Repertory Theater of St. Louis sometime in May. And by August, I was working with Joe Papp in the New York Shakespeare Festival.
Wow.
So you went to that audition and you got cast.
I got cast. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it was kind of like I was I'd say I was not cast I wasn't a starter. I came off the bench for most of the show, which was fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, you've made it to the big time when you you end up in that.
And now I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is the life. Now I'm making $300 a week.
I'm not paying my room and
75
board
to
anymore.
300. Yeah.
$300 a week. This is the life
In New York City. I got
in
it
New York
made.
City and I'm sharing an apartment way up in the Bronx with Ethan Tucker and Daryl Miller. The three of us are in a 1-bedroom apartment. But fortunately, all of us were either traveling or working, so somebody was always on the road. So
It's like flight attendants. You share one bed and just rotate through the place, right?
And there was this guy, another guy from Ohio by the name of Luke Perry, who Ethan became friends with, who I knew but never saw for like the first year that he and I knew each other, because Luke would sleep in whatever room I was in when I was on the road doing regional theater for the first couple of years in New York. So I would get these phone calls and say, hey, is it okay if my buddy Luke? I was like, yeah, I'm gone for 8 weeks. I don't care. As long as he washes the sheets before I get back. So I knew him, but never really saw him that much. We would always be kind of be passing, because Ethan had this guy, his buddy of his, who was doing soap operas in New York City, another kid from some town in Ohio I had never heard of, named Luke Perry, and that was kind of my early existence in New York City.
This is 90210 Luke Perry, right?
This is 90210 Luke.
Okay.
But before 90210, Luke was doing a soap opera called Loving, which was on ABC. Yes. Right before All My Children, or one of those, right in that time frame. So this is mid-'80s in New York City, and we were all, I think everything I owned, you could probably put in a paper bag, in like a grocery bag. You didn't have much, you didn't need much. The city was, you romanticized everything about New York, the sights, the sounds, the crowds, the noise, the smells. It was like, I'm going to be here. And you make those proclamations that end up, being the complete opposite. It's like, yep, I'm going to spend the rest of my life here. I'm going to be a New York-based actor. And that lasted 3.5 years.
Wow. And that how long was it then until piano lesson? Where was that?
Again, I think if you sent this in as a spec script, they would reject it. Literally, I finished that first season with the Shakespeare Company, which was Joe Papp was the artistic director, but Estelle Parsons, who won the Academy Award for Bonnie and Clyde, was our sort of director/mentor. And we did for an entire school year, my first job in New York City, we did, again, it was like summer stock. We did 3 plays in rotating rep for this New York City public school systems. So we did Macbeth, As You Like It, and Romeo and Juliet in rotating rep. And for that entire semester, for the first 10 months in New York, that was my job. That ended in May. That ended in May of '87. And I think by August of '87, I was in rehearsals for the piano lesson. I did a general audition.
Wow.
For Lloyd Richards and August Wilson. Simon and Cumin. Meg Simon was the casting director. Mm-hmm. And of course, I had known by then he had already had 2 plays on Broadway. He had Fences had already already come and gone on Broadway with James Earl Jones. I actually saw that play opening night. That was my wife and I, that was our first date, was opening night at Fences. I remember.
Really? Wow.
That's awesome.
There you go.
See James Earl Jones on stage. And literally, it was a year in St. Louis, my first year in New York City with the New York City Shakespeare Festival. And by the end of that summer, I had started what would become a 3-year journey with August Wilson on the piano lesson.
You guys were at the Huntington Theater at some point up in Boston, right? Where before that came to Broadway. Is that correct with piano lesson? That was
their. They had a circuit. All of his plays when Lloyd Richards and August Wilson were still working together. Like that tandem was about as close as what you would ever get to probably what Broadway was like when Tennessee Williams and Elia Kazan were working together. It was sort of that. It was that kind of collaboration. Everybody, it was kind of bigger than life. And fortunately, again, I was too young to understand the magnitude of what I was doing. I was just like, hey, this is a great gig.
This is how this works, right? Yeah.
This is how this works.
Now I'm making $600.
Now I'm making $600 and taking an Amtrak train to New Haven to rehearse.
Now, but when did the piano lesson come here? When I saw you perform it here at the Taft Theater. Was that before Broadway?
No, that was long after. That was long after Broadway. I tell people I got my directing start because Jack and Susie would allow me to come and work for the Children's Theater, and that was in the '90s. I had done that was probably maybe somewhere between 7 to 10 years, maybe at least 7 years after I did it on Broadway in 1990. But I did it here in Cincinnati. But years later, because I was directing that production.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I mean, it's just such an amazing person to link up with, right? With August Wilson and kind of into that world. Yeah. But you were with Charles Dutton was in that cast, right? And didn't you go on to do a TV show? It was a TV show. It was fairly short lived. It was Rock, right? It was called Rock.
Yeah, and that's. People ask me, how did you end up in Los Angeles? And said, well, if you follow the trail, it's kind of the same. It's sort of somebody said, hey, come to L.A. And I was like, okay, what do I got to lose? So for 3 years, like I was going to say earlier, there was this circuit for all of August's plays when Lloyd Richards was at the helm. They were always about 2 or 3 years in development before they went to Broadway. So I was working at a restaurant as a maitre d' in New York City. And when we would do a regional theater production of the piano lesson, it first premiered, and Matthew can attest to this because on the wall, on right to his right, is the first poster. The world premiere, November 23rd, 1987, is when it opened at Yale Rep, and then the next production, it ran for 8 weeks. And then I don't know how many weeks or months after that, August did some rewrites. He did the script. I went back to my maitre d' job in New York City, and then we performed at the Huntington Theater in Boston. And then from Boston, there was Chicago. We did a regional run of the play in Chicago, and each time we would do a regional run, after it ended, it would be several weeks to months that August would do rewrites, and I'd go back to my maitre d' job. And the more it went on, people would start to come in the restaurant and go, hey, weren't you in an August Wilson play? Yeah. I said, I still am. It's in rewrites. It's, we're working on it.
Work in progress.
So we'd start on the East Coast. He would do a Midwest swing, which in Chicago, and then in my first visit ever to Southern California was the year before we went to Broadway. So in 1989, we went to the Old Globe in San Diego, and we played one of the it used to be part of the Center Theater Group here in Los Angeles. It was called the Doolittle Theater. It no longer exists. But we were, and the Cincinnati connection to that, I'll never forget, was that winter of 19, we were here, I believe we were here, or maybe we were it was the winter of 89, beginning of 1990. The Cincinnati Bengals were in the Super Bowl.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
So it was either 88 or 89. And I remember seeing Cincinnati Bengals lose a heartbreaker at the end of the, once again, Joe Montana steps.
Yes.
So Joe Montana once again crushes everybody's dreams and hopes.
Yeah. And Cincinnati, right? I mean, they considered it in 81 too, right?
Yes. And then about 8 years later, it happened again. Yeah. And I was on the road. It was Super Bowl Sunday, so that meant we had a matinee and an evening show. And I remember having to having to do the evening show with everybody saying, "Sorry about your team." Joe Montana did it to you again.
Did it again.
Yeah. So that was so 1990. The Piano Lesson opens on Broadway, and we had been together as a cast by that time for 3 years. Like I said, we'd done regional runs for 3 years. So opening night, we were in mid-season form, and I'll never forget. That was probably one of the most that was the first time I think I realized the magnitude of who I was with and what I was a part of.
Right.
And that play won the Pulitzer Prize, and that opening night I'll never forget. That 3 years of rewrites and regional theater, it all kind of came together. It's like it's like, oh, this is what happens when you have 3 years of people bonding together, and being so in tune with each other. You're like a great, it's like a seminal band that gets together, and it's like, oh, okay, we're firing on all cylinders here. So, and it ran, and those days, a non-musical could run on Broadway for 6 months to a year, right?
Right.
With no problem. And I think we ran for most of the spring and the summer. And I left out a little fun fact: the original production of The Piano Lesson at Yale Rep. That was the original production. The lead role in that play was always written with Charles Dutton in mind, because he and August Wilson had a great relationship. And August wrote Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was the first of his plays that went to Broadway. Charles Dutton played the lead in that. So he came up with this when The Piano Lesson came. He wrote that with Rock. I called Rock Dutton with Rock in mind. Well, of course, when it was time for that first production to happen at Yale Rep, Charles Dutton was in a film called Q&A by Sidney Lumet, which was being shot in New York City. So another actor by the name of Samuel L. Jackson played was in the
never heard of him.
Okay.
So my first experience with August Wilson was playing opposite Samuel L. Jackson in the first production of The Piano Lesson.
Wow.
Sam at the time was not Samuel L. Jackson movie star.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He actually understudied Charles Dutton on Broadway. Most people don't know that. Charles Dutton's understudy for The Piano Lesson on Broadway was Samuel L. Jackson, who never went on.
Wow. Never once got to go.
Never once got to go on.
Wow.
You know, Rocky, a great memory I have is Rex's dad, who was our acting teacher at SCPA. We were all in acting lab for that opening night, and he was telling us, I guess you were speaking to him, but he was relating to all of us kids. He was like that waiting at Sardi's for the review to come out in the Times kind of thing, and it was just.
I have a black and white picture of me and Dave at the opening night ceremony. Now it literally feels like a dream that you had, and you're like, no, that really did happen. Look, I got pictures of it.
Yeah, and I actually got to see you. I went and moved to Boston in '89 and worked at the Huntington. And I was trying to remember which one of the shows, and I don't remember. One of the shows was one of the August Wilson plays was coming through, and I knew that you guys had been through there before, so we got to do that. And then I moved down to New York in '90 and got to see you do Piano Lesson on Broadway, which was fantastic. Yeah. Not that night with my dad, but I got to go another time. But so as you're doing that or coming out of piano lesson, is it straight then to LA, or what happens at that point in time?
Yeah, so very much kind of like every other seminal moment in my life, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing now. And that's kind of what happened with the television show and coming to LA.
Did you move out there on spec, or had you been
I was literally right off the Broadway stage with the piano lesson. We closed I think we closed in the late summer, and somewhere in August, sometime early August, I get a phone call from Charles Dutton. And I said, "Where are you?" He goes, "I'm in Hollywood. I'm in Los Angeles." "What the hell are you doing in Los Angeles?" He says, "I'm doing a pilot." And this is how much I knew about TV. I said, "What's a pilot?" He said,
really? That's great.
It's truly a stage actor. I had no television experience whatsoever.
Right.
What's a pilot? What exactly is a pilot? It's the first episode.
I believe Sam Jackson's got a great speech in Pulp Fiction about what a pilot is, where he's trying to explain to John Travolta, because that he shows on TV. The first ones they make are called a pilot.
I feel like that's what I was being told by Charles Dutton. So he had after the Broadway run, Stan Daniels, the executive producer, the guy who created Taxi, the sitcom Taxi, and who also created Cheers,
right?
Wanted to do a sitcom for Charles Dutton. Living room drama, a la All in the Family style drama with Charles Dutton. So Charles Dutton, of course, hey, we're going to go to Hollywood and make a TV show. He goes to Hollywood, and I hadn't spoken, unbeknownst to me, but he goes there and he's very disenchanted by the supporting cast that they had surrounded him with, and all the things that worked in my favor were, this was a new sitcom on a new network at the time. The Fox network was a fledgling network that was trying to make its way, trying to compete with the big three, CBS, NBC, and ABC. And they were still trying to make a name for themselves. So they were willing to take a few creative risks. And Charles Dutton said to this team of writers and executives, he says, "Look, you can call me a snob if you want." He goes, "But I'm not. There's no chemistry with these people that you've saddled me with that's supposed to be playing my family." I've been working with a group of guys for 3 years on Broadway. He said, if there's anything we have is chemistry. We've known each other. We work together. We work in shorthand with each other. We can finish each other's sentences. Let me bring my guys out and read for the family members for the role of the father and the role of the ne'er-do-well brother. And so Carl Gordon, who was also in the Broadway production Piano Lesson, Charles Dutton flies the two of us out to Los Angeles to do this audition. He calls me up and says, "I'm flying you out to do an audition for this pilot and for the series." Now, they had already hired a guy, and they fired him to play his brother, who was a friend of Rock's, who was a friend of Charles Dutton, who went to Yale with him.
Wow.
So they were the two of them as old buddies were going to go out and make their fortune doing the sitcom together. And Charles was the first one to realize it's not working. Whatever's happening, this chemistry is not working. So they fly me out to Los Angeles. At the time, there was an airline that only went from New York to L.A. It was a really expensive, white glove service on the plane and everything. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm getting this job. I have no TV experience, but I am going to have the best weekend of my life. I'm going to go there. I'm going to eat on everybody's dime.
Nothing to lose.
I got absolutely nothing to lose. They're flying me on this plane. The MGM Grand was the name of the.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was basically all first class, wasn't it?
It was all first class,
yeah.
And they're serving people. They're serving you with white gloves, and it was like I was like, oh well, at least I'll get. It's kind of like last meal before going to the electric chair. I was like, at least.
Before I go back to my maitre d' job in New York. Now that the
I'm gonna have the time of my life. I'm going to spend money on Fox's dime, right?
Yeah.
So I get there, and I have, like I said, I have no on-camera experience. Literally, I've never, especially for a sitcom, right? So I walk in thinking to myself, they're not going to hire me because I'm just not. I have no TV experience, and I think it was that lack of. I wasn't nervous or anything. I was just like, I'm going to do this, get it over with, so Rock can take me out to dinner, right? I'm like, Now we're going to do L.A. This This is the price I have to pay for a weekend in Los Angeles.
It's like somebody selling you a timeshare. You got to sit through the pitch, and then you get to
sit
go.
through the pitch. So I'll go in, I'll do the audition. They'll say, thanks, but he doesn't have any television experience. And I'll hear all that. And then we can go out to dinner, right? And that was my mindset, right? So I go in and I do the audition. After the audition, I see Charles Dutton. I was like, where are you taking me to dinner? He goes, well, not so fast, because now you got to go to wardrobe because you got hired for this part. And I literally
just like that.
Wow.
He said, you got the gig. And I thought, I was like, no, seriously, stop playing. Where are we going to dinner? He goes, no, you got to stay here. You got to stay here now. We got to shoot. We're going to rehearsal tomorrow. We got to reshoot the pilot because now we have a new cast. My idea worked. You and Carl Gordon, who was also in the piano lesson, are you're going to play my brother and my dad. And I thought to myself, I think I brought one change of clothes. I think I left something on the stove back in New York. I can't stay here. And I thought about it, and I was like, again, 26, 27 years old. I think, nothing to lose. So I thought, okay, we'll shoot the pilot, and there was no guarantee, of course, that it was going to go to series. Not only we shot the pilot, it went to series, and it ran for 3 years. And that's how I ended up in Los Angeles. Wow. Literally for 3 years thinking like,
came up for a night.
I got to get back to New York. I don't have a change of clothes. I have stuff. I got to go get my shit back in New York.
You never did pack up that apartment in New York. I don't know what happened.
That apartment might have burned to the ground because I swear I left the oven on. I'm like, I got to go back.
Now, did you ever work with Luke Perry when you were out there? Your roommate?
Never did. He and I became friends. We knew each other for years. He would come over and watch the Final Four. So we were always it was 6 degrees of Ethan Tucker. We just happened to be a bunch of guys who all knew each other. So
any other Cincinnati connections that you've worked with or crossed paths with that were news to you?
There were a few other Cincinnati people. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that when I did the West Wing, I think Martin Sheen had either lived in Cincinnati for a period of time.
You're right.
Allison Janney. And I believe Allison Janney was also from Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken.
I didn't know that.
Really? I did not know that.
Emilio Estevez lives in Over the Rhine, bought a condo in Over the Rhine. He shot a movie with his dad, I don't know, here, and came and kind of fell in love with the place. And like you said, his dad grew up around here, and he bought a car. I don't know if he lives there full time, but I heard somebody screaming his name out the window when I was coming from the bakery. He was like, "Hey, Emilio."
So that was my, and it's funny, Tim, that you say that because I learned, and now it's been 30 plus years of being here in Southern California. I always joke to people. I said, I'm no longer surprised. I meet more people from Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. If I'm in a crowded room and say I'm from Ohio, like half the room is like, hey, I'm from Cleveland. Wow. I'm from. So I think there was sort of this mass exodus. But I also think that a lot of my friends who either from the Midwest, from Ohio, who've done well here, I think there's a work ethic that comes from our Midwestern upbringing and just a work ethic and never being really self-satisfied or always feeling like there's more to be done. You get up, you got to get up and make something happen. And what I've realized, especially out here in Hollywood, that most of my friends who've been able to sustain themselves for decades have that sort of Midwest. You go, you do your job, you put in a hard day's work, and it's a mentality. It's just a mentality that you don't expect things to happen for you. You got to go out and make them happen.
Totally. Yeah. Are you also now segueing because you touched on the directing and whatnot? Is that something that's becoming more of interest to you?
Is it a balance? It's every time I hear it out loud. I think I've directed now 26 or 27 episodes of NCIS. Wow. It's it's one of those things that I didn't really know that I had that tool and that arrow in my bag until somebody says, you know a lot about staging and et cetera, and you realize, I've been doing it since I was 11 years old. I mean, there are things.
Right.
Something had to sink in at some point along the way.
Yeah. Things started to sink in at some point. Like they didn't just go in one ear and out the other. Right. But I think it wasn't because I was the one sort of eliciting and I got to get an audience with the executive producer about directing. It was people around me that said, you'd make a really good director. And I was like, they were like, just the way your ability to communicate with people and on both sides of the camera, et cetera, we really think you should push toward this. And I thought, I'm just to prove you wrong, I'm gonna reach out and see what happens. I'm gonna make the effort to do this. It's not gonna happen. And I've realized over my life, my mindset is, what do I have to lose? I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And I never go in thinking like, oh, I know I'm going to ace this. It's like, I can always go back to that made-a-D job. It just doesn't work out.
Right.
Yeah.
How did NCIS come about? I mean, how did you? Because it's a long run now. How many years have you been doing that?
It's now in its 20. Believe it or not, it's in its 22nd season.
Wow.
And
that's outstanding.
I'm a newcomer. I've only been there 17 seasons. So,
right.
But again, that was most of my career, with the exception of the sitcom Rock that I did, which was on Fox. Most of my television career, I've done television. I've done guest spots for different shows like ER and The West Wing and different shows. But I've had the majority of my television career has been for CBS. I think I've done about 5 or 6 CBS series.
Because you were in Chicago Hope as well, weren't you? Which was also with Mark Harmon.
Which was why NCIS came about, because Harmon and I met on the set on Chicago Hope. We worked together for 3 seasons on that. NCIS had already been established. I met the producers on season 5, and this is when I guess you're playing on a different level, because I never auditioned for NCIS. I went in and sat and talked to the executive producers, and for like about an hour, 1 hour meeting. And I didn't know anybody connected with NCIS except for one guy, and that was Mark Harmon. And what I've learned is, if you only know one person, it's good to know the star of the show.
That's right. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A lot more pull than.
And they were looking to find an actor to play the role of the director, which had already been established, but they wanted to. And I got the Mark Harmon seal of approval. I was like, hey, he was basically said, this is the guy, that I approve, and if you run it up the flagpole, and if everybody else, and then I had a relationship with the network. So that was the first time I didn't have to go in and read for a role. I kind of went in, sat, and did it. They look you over to make sure you're not you're.
Yeah,
he doesn't have a drug problem now. He's not.
You have sound mind. You don't have any. You don't have any outstanding warrants. Okay, he's in.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. And like, I even know like Todd Loizo ended up doing recurring kind of guest spots on that show with a Cincinnati connection. I don't. But it was kind of amazing to me when I looked back and tried to figure out how long it had been. That's why I asked you. I couldn't actually figure out how long it's been on the air. And then there were other. Right, there's been these other versions that spun up, right?
There's an NCIS universe. I mean, literally.
Yes, universe. That's the word we're looking for.
I remember sitting in the executive producer's office. Now, this is like after a few years. My daughter's 24 years. She'll be 24 in May. She was 6 when I first started on NCIS.
Wow.
She's never not known her dad being on NCIS. Right?
Now, there's a... we film in Santa Clarita, which is about 30 miles north of Hollywood. So it's outside of all the Hollywood studios and everything else. It's a group of sound stages that Don Belisario, who created the series, he just kind of found his home out there. He was shooting episodes of JAG, which preceded NCIS out in Santa Clarita. So when people ask me, where do you guys film? I always say we're in the witness protection program.
Right.
It's 35 miles north, and nobody comes to visit.
Right.
So the first time I took my daughter there, the first season I was working, she's 6 years old. There's an amusement park. There's a Magic Mountain, like literally across the freeway on the other side of where we work. So we're driving, and she looks at the freeway, and she sees these roller coasters. She thinks I work at Magic Mountain. So she's all excited until we turn off the off-ramp and go the other way.
Go the other direction, right?
She never watched one take of the episode. She sat in the trailer and ordered from craft service, and watched cartoons. She had the best time.
I mean, I was going to say, because that's pretty cool right there. I mean, forget that she's sitting on set.
She was a little deflated that I didn't work at Magic Mountain because.
Yes.
Oh man.
I wanted to ask you, Rocky, how was your golf game in Scotland? When I saw you a few years back and you were taking a trip, how did you shoot?
Well, let's see. I have a picture. I got to send it to you. I got to find it, screenshot, and forward it to you. There's a picture of me lying down in the middle of the fairway, lying sideways in front of a golf ball, which is in the middle of the fairway. That was one of the few times I actually found the middle of the fairway.
Okay.
We had a great time, man. Playing golf in Scotland is a whole different experience because usually it's like, summer in Scotland is wind and rain. It's like it's overcast, a little windy, 70 degrees with light rain, and they're like, a beautiful day for golf, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we had a couple days where it was actually picture perfect, sunny, beautiful, and it was one of those. And I hit this tee shot and literally split the fairway, and I was like, hold on, somebody get a picture.
I gotta capture this,
because I've been looking for lost golf balls all day, and I got a shot of me. I'm gonna send it to you. I got a shot of me laying in front of the golf ball. You could see all this beautiful Scottish mountain range behind me, and I was like, so that pretty much summed up my adventure.
That was it.
When I found the days I found the fairway was a celebration.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a video of my wife. My wife and I were in Ireland, and I played Ballybunion, which was my first time ever playing a links course. And on 18, I actually drove. Similar story. I couldn't believe I made the fairway on that. Tight. But those links courses are brutal.
It's a different experience. And Scott, some of those courses, some of the oldest courses in the world, and you walk all the courses. And you got a lot of hills and valleys. It's a great experience. A lot of blind tee shots.
Yep.
So you always know when somebody hit a bad shot because you'd be like, man, isn't it beautiful? Isn't the ocean beautiful?
Yes.
Take in the scenery.
Let's just take in this moment. Do you want to look for your ball? Nah.
Right.
I'd be remiss, Rocky, before we let you go, not asking about one of my favorite movies, and we just lost Gene Hackman, Crimson Tide. Just give us a couple I don't know sentences on how that came to be and what that experience was like.
That I was just thinking about that recently. It's like it once again. Having lost James Gandolfini, who was also in the cast of Crimson Tide. There were a group of guys in that movie that we all sort of bonded together. Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington were the stars of that movie, but there was
Viggo Mortensen.
It was a very different time in Hollywood where you had at least 5 or 6 guys who basically went on to become like A-list the actors themselves, all as sort of secondary cast members in that movie. And we all became we all bonded, and that movie was shot on a set in Culver City. They built a gimbal, for people who don't know. Gimbal's sort of this rotating set, almost like an amusement park ride. And it was simulating a submarine, and on any given day they could angle the entire set so that it could tilt just like a submarine may be diving at some point. So there were days where we would come in and the entire set would be at an angle where we'd all be literally, you'd have to kind of stick them on your shoes or hang on to something because you're playing this as if the submarine's taking a hit or it's diving or whatever.
In the original Star Trek, they had to turn the camera. This one, they turned the set.
They turned the set. They turned the set. And it was very close quarters, and in trying to simulate sort of life on a submarine, there were days when you're just like literally on top of each other, and they're spritzing you with this combination of sunblock and water to trying to get everybody's, so it looks like you're all kind of sweating and hot, and there's the threat of global nuclear war. And we literally had to separate each other. There were a couple of times where guys were just like, it's like you're in the middle of a scrum after a play, and it's like guys start getting under each other's collar, and it's like, oh, okay, all right, boys, let's break it up. So, and Gene Hackman, who I think who had this reputation of being, sort of a gruff, standoffish guy. I think he was probably very shy, just a guy who was he's not the most sociable person. But and I think it also helped that my character was kind of on his side of the argument. So I was one of the guys on his crew, and I don't know how long it was into the shooting of that. He was a big boxing fan, and his stand-in was a member of a family, the Goosen family. The Goosens, the Greg Goosen, Joe Goosen, all of them, they were kind of like Don King. They managed fighters, and they had a lot of fighters in Los Angeles, and a lot of those fighters fought at the Olympic Auditorium. And I'll never forget, at the end of one of our shooting days, Gene Hackman comes over to me and a couple of the other guys and goes, "You boys want to go watch the fights with me?" And I was like, "Who's going to say no to Gene Hackman?"
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that was, and it wasn't, and it didn't happen. I don't think it happened any time after that. But it was the one time we all kind of went with him and hung out. We got to hang out with Gene Hackman, and we shot the movie. It was just kind of great. I always tell people, I said, there were a handful of actors that I always dreamed about either meeting or working with. And Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman were in that list. And I was like, so 1 out of 2 is not bad.
That's not bad at all. Well, and you were a fan of those 70s movies, too. I mean, I've heard you, and even kind of that aesthetic. I remember you saying that Raging Bull was like one of your favorite all-time films at some point in time. But you know what I mean, of that, and you think of, like French Connect, you think Gene Hackman came out of that, at least in our minds, out of that. And also, aesthetic. I was again, all the actor studio act, and then that was Gene Hackman was of that ilk, like with Brando and all those guys who studied under Lee Strasberg or were disciples of Lee Strasberg. So we were just, it was like, and this is kind of like, and he was a stage actor. He started off on stage, and he just had this incredible everyman quality, and he was so prolific and so good at what he did. And I'll never forget the last day of shooting, I went to his trailer to say goodbye to him. And the thing that really resonated with me is that as successful as he was, and I always said, I was joking, I was like, at that point, if Gene Hackman, it's either, almost every other movie was either Gene Hackman or Michael Caine. They were almost in, it's like every time you looked up, they were in another movie, right? And I remember knocking on his trailer door saying goodbye to him. And he looked at me with complete sincerity and said, "Yeah, I hope we get something after this." And I'm thinking to myself, "You're Gene Hackman. What do you mean, get something after this? You're in every other movie." Right. But that insecurity that actors have where this could be the last gig you ever get, it never really goes away. Yeah, I'm talking to Gene Hackman, and he's like, "Man, I hope something else comes down the pipe for us." I'm like,
Now, Rocky, are you a boxing fan yourself?
Oh, yeah. I was definitely a boxing fan.
Aaron Pryor?
Aaron Pryor.
Walk time, baby.
Yes, sir. I got to meet a couple of fighters out here, too. A couple of guys. And when we shot the series, the sitcom Rock with Charles Dutton, the second season, we shot it live. We did 22 episodes of that show, like Saturday Night Live. We shot it. Our tape day was 30 minutes long. We shot it on Sunday. When we aired it on Sunday, we did one for safety. We'd always do a run through for safety where they would record it, but we actually shot it live. Muhammad Ali came to one of the tapings of that, man.
Oh, wow.
So, and it was his birthday, and I'll never forget. And at this time, he was already having trouble. He wasn't talking very much. He kind of kept, but he was still, he walked in the room and was like, "That's Muhammad Ali."
Yeah.
And he was doing, and his way of communicating with you and kind of like being present or whatever, he was really big into sleight of hand stuff. And he would do these like, ninth grade, ninth grade magic tricks, like, with the foam balls
coin,
and the cane that turns into a handkerchief and all. He had this thing for like, and I was like, I'm thinking to myself, I had that same magic kit when I was 13. I think I was but that was his thing. All the little sleight of hand stuff that he would do in lieu of talking and communicating. His way of like, being a showman and entertaining is like, I'm going to show you some sleight of hand.
He was a class clown like you, man.
He was a class clown. Yeah, absolutely.
So we like to ask every guest on this one, Rocky, as a sports fan, Cincinnati sports fan, you get to wear one jersey. Who would that be and whose name would be on it?
Reds, Bengals, any time frame.
Any time frame.
Oh, that's easy for me because I wanted to replace number 8 Joe Morgan for the Cincinnati Reds. I was going to be second. Okay. I was going to play second base for the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah.
Until Dave Stull said to me, "You might want to rethink that." But my dream as a kid was, if this acting thing doesn't work out, I could always play second base for the Cincinnati Reds.
Have you ever gotten to go do any of those, like celebrity softball tournaments or play in any of the stadiums or do any of that stuff?
I did the Hollywood Stars night one night, and the Reds were actually the visiting team for the against the Dodgers, and this was back in the day. Barry Larkin was still on the team, so I got to
nice.
Okay. So we got to play, 2 innings of really bad baseball with the Reds watching us from the dugout.
Yeah.
And I went to a Final Four because CBS, the one perk I always take advantage of at CBS because they host the Final Four, right?
Yeah.
The national championship, college basketball. One year it was in New Orleans. And they had asked, like Ray Romano or somebody, it was a minor league team it was the minor league team for the New York Mets. It was called the New Orleans Zephyrs. And I'm sure it's still in existence. They wanted somebody to throw out the first pitch for the New Orleans Zephyrs for their minor league game. And all the people that they asked at CBS had turned it down. They came to me, and I was like, hell yeah. I'm in.
You're talking about it.
Right?
I'm thinking, look, I played baseball. I've never been more nervous in my life. I walked out, thinking minor league. What is it, 300 people there, right?
Right.
There was like 5,000 people in the stadium. I walked out, and I'm thinking to myself, holy, what have I got myself? No wonder everybody else said no.
Now, did you stand on the mound, or did you stay in front of the mound?
No, I threw from the mound.
Okay, nice. Nice.
Okay, and how'd it go?
It was just a bit outside. But I didn't bounce it. I didn't throw a 59-footer though.
All right, well that's good. You got the whole way into the mitt. That's what counts, right?
There you go. Tell you, when you come back to town, we'd love to take you out to a Reds game. So just let us know.
That would be a lot of fun. That would be great.
We dreamed this podcast up, the three of us, at a Reds game. So it's kind of it's the home of the idea. We were just sitting there looking around and talking about Cincinnati and talking about all the connections and stuff when Tim was in town. And we were like, hey, Ronnie's got this studio down here. Let's just go do ourselves a podcast. So we really appreciate you coming on and joining us and sharing stories with us. It's been a lot of fun.
That's great. I really appreciate it too. A friend of mine, her name is Jane Sillette. She was a year ahead of me at SCPA, and her parents had season tickets for Reds all through our middle school and high school year. I never knew this, and her goal. A few years ago, we reconnected, and her goal was to go to every major league ballpark, and she had never been to Dodger Stadium. And I took her to Dodger Stadium for her first visit, and I said, Jane, I never knew that you were so big. She says, yeah, we used to get those tickets, and my parents had season tickets, and she said, remember at school, you would get those straight A the student tickets for the Reds, and I was like,
oh, that's right.
And I said, Jane, I would have no knowledge of that. You did say they were straight A students, right?
That's right.
Why would I have any knowledge of that? You're talking to the wrong man.
Guy. Maybe if somebody like you invited me with your straight A tickets, I would have gone.
So, last story, we get to Dodger Stadium, we get to the front. This is like maybe 3 years ago. We get to the gate, or hand off our tickets, and somebody at security looks up and they go, hey, You're the guy on NCIS. And I'm like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And this is my friend Jane. She's from Cincinnati. She's trying to visit every ballpark. This is her first visit to Dodger Stadium. And the security person said, oh, well, Jane, it's so nice to meet you. Welcome to Dodger Stadium. So we go to our seats. I didn't think anything about it. About midway into the game, around the 4th or 5th inning, the security person comes up with this entire bag full of swag of like Dodgers jackets, hats.
Oh my goodness.
All this memorabilia, and she's giving it to my friend Jane as a gift, like, hey, welcome. And there's a kid with his parents sitting behind us, and the look on his face is like, we didn't get all that when we came in. So
actually,
so Jane,
that we're not taking you to the game.
So Jane turns to me, she goes, I want you to go to every ballpark with me.
The NattyCast is proudly brought to you by Pago Lago Productions. The show is hosted by Tim Barker, Rex Stull, and Ron Thomas. Produced and edited by Matthew Lake and associate produced by Ethan Spanja. Special thanks to Sadie Kern at Pop Gun Flow for the graphics and to Brando Triantafilu for the original theme song. Feel free to follow us at _NattyCast on Instagram or head to our website, thenattycast.com. You can get this show wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.